and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, political upheaval in Ukraine. Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk has announced that he will resign under pressure to expedite urgently needed economic reforms after losing both public and government support. And 55 years after the first person traveled into space, we celebrate International Day of Human Spaceflight as the International Space Station prepares for decommission in the year 2024. We take a look at the future of space travel. And we start in Ukraine. Swept into office by the mass protest that deposed the pro-Russia president 2 years ago, Ukraine's new leaders promised that the country would soon be welcomed into Europe as a thriving new democracy. But now, Prime Minister Yatsenyuk will resign, having failed to fulfill that promise. Yatsenyuk submitted a request to the parliament on Tuesday, and his successor will likely be parliamentary speaker. But Grossman, the parliamentary speaker, faces no easy task. Let's take a look at this.
Political upheaval. Ukraine's embattled Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk has resigned, opening the way for the formation of a new government.
I have taken the decision to resign as Prime Minister of Ukraine. My decision was predicated by several issues. The political crisis in the country has been artificially created. The desire to change one person has blinded politicians and paralyzed their political will for real change.
Yatsenyuk came to power after former pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych was ousted in February 2014. He has been a highly unpopular figure in Ukraine, with his approval rating slipping into the single-digit range as his government has been besieged by war, corruption, and economic struggles. The resignation comes less than 2 months after Yatsenyuk's cabinet survived a no-confidence vote in February. And the powerful parliamentary speaker Volodymyr Groysman now seems set to be elected to the prime minister's job.
I expected it will be Grossman. I'm not going to give up this idea, but I will work with any prime minister.
Groysman, a professional manager and former mayor of Vinnytsia in central Ukraine, rose rapidly in government ranks following the Maidan revolution 2 years ago. However, Ukrainians share mixed views about the possibility of his appointment as prime minister.
I believe Groysman is not the best candidate at the moment. He's not a leader. That's it.
I believe the president and the prime minister must work together, be in the same coalition. That is why the candidate offered by the president will be better than the one who will not cooperate with the president.
But whoever takes the position will face a difficult task. Among the challenges facing a new prime minister will be reviving an economy that fell by nearly 10% in 2015, and facing the disappointment of impoverished Ukrainians ready for major change.
And for more on that, we're joined by 3 guests coming from different parts of the world. In Kiev, we have Mr. Boris Sobolev, who is a former Ukrainian Undersecretary of State and also currently a senior advisor in the State Import-Export Bank of Ukraine. Meanwhile, joining us from Moscow, we are having Mr. Dmitry Barbich, who is a political analyst from Sputnik International News Agency. And also joining us from Brussels, we are having Mr. Paul Ivan, senior policy analyst from the European Policy Center. Gentlemen, welcome to the 3 of you. First of all, may I ask you, Mr. Ivan, as an observer, looking at the current session going on in the Ukrainian parliament, what do you make of the fact that still a prime minister has not come into being, and also the change of cabinet has not been decided? What would that mean?
Well, I think it's normal for this sort of activity to take at least several days. I mean, we've seen some countries it can even take months, and I'm speaking from Brussels. So it's really not that unusual. I would say that they will need some time to decide.
Really?
on the new government.
Well,
No,
Mr. Yuan, I have to ask you, Brussels
yes.
Politics in Belgium is very different from a country that is facing a lot of crises like Ukraine, and therefore Brussels probably could afford several months of delay, but not in Ukraine.
No, certainly, but I'm sure they will manage to decide much quicker than several months. I mean, we can expect tomorrow and in the next days, I think, to have the announcement of the new government. They certainly cannot afford to spend too much time on infighting.
Mr. Barbich, coming from the Russian perspective, we understand the U.S. State Department spokesperson, even at the daily briefing, has been urging Rada, which is the parliament in Ukraine, to quickly come up with the plan, the reshuffling plan. What about from Russia's perspective? Many wonder what will the new cabinet's political tendency would be, pro-Russia or actually 100% pro-West, so-called?
Unfortunately, right now the political orientation of Ukraine is 100% pro-US, pro-United States, also 100% pro-European Union, and this is not going to change. In fact, this is interesting that the countries which are now under the influence of the United States and the European Union, they can change personalities. I mean, Mr. Saakashvili was very unpopular in Georgia, so he had to leave. Right now, Mr. Yatsenyuk, who became very unpopular in Ukraine, he has to leave. But these countries cannot change their ideologies. Georgia remained anti-Russian even after Mr. Saakashvili left. And Ukraine will remain anti-Russian even as Mr. Yatsenyuk leaves. But I would not say, for example, that Mr. Yanukovych, before he was ousted, was pro-Russian. I think that Yanukovych also wanted to have good relationship with the West. He obviously had problems signing the association agreement with the European Union, but now we see that this association agreement was not very well prepared because, look, Ukraine lost so much in terms of GDP, and of course not all of it can be explained by the war, because the territory controlled by the separatists in the east of Ukraine is just 3%.
We're going to the economy. We're going to the economy of Ukraine, also with the Ukrainian gas. But for you, I would really like to follow up about Russia's intention. Many have wondered Russia's withdrawal of troops and influence apparently from Syria. Would that mean Russia is increasing its power and muscle toward the next round of even military struggle inside Ukraine? And how do you see Russia's influence in the overall political environment inside Ukraine?
Absolutely not. I would repeat that right now the rebels in the east of Ukraine control just 3% of the territory. They are obviously happy to have that much. Right now, you know, the government in Ukraine is trying to explain the dramatic fall in the living standards by just the civil war inside Ukraine, but obviously this is not the main reason, because you know, the industrial production fell all over the country. I think the main reason was the fact that the government did not want to have any economic ties to Russia. You know, they even canceled the direct flights between Moscow and Kiev. And Russia, of course, is not going to introduce troops in the east of Ukraine, not regular units. There are no regular units. And Russia has no intention of occupying Ukraine. If Russia wanted to occupy Ukraine, it could have done so back in 2014.
Okay, let me go to Mr. Yuan here. We understand if the Russians already indicated their intention, what about from the West, including the United States and some of the European countries? We understand U.S. now has something called the European Reassurance Initiative, and that is coming from the annual defense budget from the U.S. At this moment, more than $300 billion in that category. What would that mean militarily for the European countries and also for countries within NATO in terms of its relations with Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia?
Sure. I mean, I would just add before answering your question that I think the description of Russia's intentions we just heard doesn't really have a lot to do with the actual practice of Russia. I mean, a country that had its territory annexed, that is still waging a war with its biggest neighbor, would obviously suffer economically. Now, regarding the NATO measures, it's clear that when you have in a neighborhood in Eastern Europe a country which breaks the fundamental principles of international law and of the fundamental principles of the European security order, the other countries need to take actions. They need to take actions to prepare for even for the wars. And we had a number of wars which involved Russia crossing the borders into Georgia, into Ukraine. Obviously, the countries in Eastern Europe are worried about such developments, and they do activate their alliances.
Well, there are a lot of countries paying attention to your country, I have to say, Mr. Sobolev. Glad to be connected now. May I have your opinion about the to be yet decided the new cabinet and the candidacy of a new prime minister vis-a-vis the already quite clear conflict between the prime minister, I mean the former one, and the president?
Well, yes, I think I can say.
Let's go to Mr. Sobolev.
I think that
let's go to Mr. Sobolev in
Yatsenyuk.
Ukraine. Sorry,
okay,
let's
fine.
go to Mr. Sobolev in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Because sorry, but the connection was quite poor. Let me start to let me join the discussion because I was hardly hear some of the answers. But let me first react on the news that Russia did not conquer Ukraine because it doesn't want. Firstly, because of the failure of Russian authority to comply with the international law, the whole world has imposed sanctions which have produced a very, very dramatic impact on Russia.
Okay.
And the Russian authorities are now scared to continue it. This is the reason number one.
All right, Mr. Sobolev.
Mr.
Sobolev, may I make clear here? We're not here to talk about
Yes.
Russia's role in the overall development of the Ukrainian politics. We have been focusing on that in many of our previous occasions. However, this time we really want to focus a lot on your country's politics with a already changed possibility of a cabinet and a very obvious conflict between the prime minister and the president. And therefore, I want to focus your answer on this aspect, please. So help us to understand, what does it mean now with a possible change of cabinet? What that bring in terms with the current president, Mr. Poroshenko?
Okay. I've known Mr. Yatsenyuk personally since 15 years, and he's a good banker, and personally he's a committed person to reform, but he couldn't cope with the administrative job, and the president has decided to accelerate reforms and to recruit more energetic, let me call, functionary, who is Mr. Groisman, and who is actually on the rostrum of the parliament and to be appointed the new leader of the new government. So I think that the coalition will be working hard under his leadership in the government to accelerate reforms and to restore the economic growth.
Well, but Mr. Sobolev, I have to ask you further on that point. I'm not sure whether we do know exactly how the two plans you have talked about, which is anti-corruption and also bring better economic situation with the change of the personnel of the prime minister's position. We understand already the IMF certainly has, to a certain extent, lost its hope about the anti-corruption drive going on in your country, according to the IMF managing director, Ms. Lagarde. And also, your country has today decided with the parliament to you raised the possibility of a moratorium supposed to be paid to the countries that have lent the money to your country. Many say this is already an obvious sign of default coming from Ukraine. That is a big issue. So, Mr. Sobolev, help us to understand how, with the change of one personnel in your government, that is likely to change.
Well, actually, you know, the IMF program has been really suspended for this governmental crisis, let me call it, because, well, this is not a typical or a classical governmental crisis or political crisis. This is an interpersonal crisis and more connected with the post-oligarch system, which has been partially ruined already. So we are very hopeful that the new government will complete the job, and the president will be also forced by the new government to accelerate the pace of reforms.
Mr. Yvan, there have been...
The major part, the major part of that reforms have been over. Especially the most painful one for the majority of population in terms of the tariff and prices rises and devaluation of the national currency.
There has been questions even raised, Mr. Yvan, about the credibilities of either the president or the prime minister now, who now resigned already, in the international press. Not to mention the economic situation of Ukraine and also the anti-corruption drive going on in the country, not yet at least according to a report, to the satisfaction of many. What do you make of Ukraine's capabilities now, governing capabilities? Will that change with one personnel? As the former Prime Minister already said it very clearly, he does not believe so. What do you make of this reality?
No, clearly the new government will have to prove its
let's go to Mr. Yvan.
Credentials.
Yes.
Do you hear me? Yeah, I was saying that the new government will clearly have to prove its reformist credentials, both and first and foremost to the Ukrainian people. So this will clearly depend on the reforms that they will manage to do, on getting the economy back on track, and on actually taking some tough anti-corruption and de-oligarchization measures. And obviously the EU is looking very carefully at that and is more than willing to support that process. But there needs to be enough political and strong political will to actually advance on that road.
Will the European Union, Mr. Yvan, very briefly from you, give Ukraine another chance? Because it seems that Ukraine's hope of joining the EU has been dampened, at least with the Netherlands' vote on that EU trade deal with Ukraine. Will Ukraine has another way out by joining the EU and maybe let the current administration winning more support among its constituencies?
Well, the Ukraine was not supposed to join the EU anytime soon. I mean, joining the EU is a very long process that will take at least 1 decade. We're talking here about the association with the EU, and it's clear that the Dutch referendum has a negative effect on that, but it will remain to be seen in the next months what will be really the practical legal implications of the vote, given that it was a consultative referendum and that the association agreement had already entered into force.
Okay. Before we go, Mr. Barbish, coming from Russia, what do you think are the aspects that Russia, as a neighbor of Ukraine, is going to observe very clearly and closely about what's going on inside that country, and how would those, in a way, barometers mean for Russia?
Well, I would say that Russia is just very unhappy about the developments in Ukraine, because people there suffer for nothing. You know, the chairman of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, has said that Ukraine will not join the EU in the next 25 years. So Mr. Poroshenko, when he said a few months ago that Ukraine would join in the foreseeable future, was simply lying. It became apparent right now. Also, since the introduction of the so-called association agreement, the Ukrainian exports to the European Union have not been rising, they have been falling. You know, the Ukrainian Economics Development Ministry registered that in 2015, Ukrainian exports to the EU fell by about 26%. So Mr. Yatsenyuk has a very poor record right now. And I think a lot of people in Ukraine are becoming allergic to the word reform because Yatsenyuk and Poroshenko, they keep talking about the reform, but life is getting just worse and worse.
We'll see how things will
evolve.
Well,
the agreement entered into force in January now, so it didn't apply last year.
All right. We are going to save that debate for another occasion, which we've already had in many of the previous occasions. For now, we're running out of time for a complicated country as Ukraine. Thank you so much for offering your own unique perspectives. Paul Ivan in Brussels, Dmitry Barbich in Moscow, and also Boris Sobolev inside Ukraine in Kiev for us. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us, all of you. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. 55 years after the first man traveled into space, we celebrate the International Day of Human Spaceflight, with the International Space Station slated to close in the year 2024. Will humanity continue its exploration of space in the future? Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. On April the 12th, 1961, Yuri Gagarin made history as the first human to travel into space. In the year 2011, the UN General Assembly decided to celebrate the space era on April the 12th every year to mark this historic event. The space industry has made significant advancements in recent years, even as some countries have slashed the budgets for space travel.
A historic event. 55 years ago, Yuri Gagarin was the first person to travel to outer space. He made one orbit around the globe before returning safely to Earth. His 108-minute flight gave him a permanent place in the history books as the first man in space. To this day, his achievement is celebrated in Russia and abroad.
It was an event that raised us all above our heads. We could do it, we all could.
More than half a century later, global space programs have made significant advances. Yuri Gagarin's flight lasted less than 2 hours. Today, cosmonauts can spend nearly a year in space, working aboard the International Space Station. The International Space Station is set to function for another 8 years, up to 2024. This offers scientists and engineers the time they need to ensure the future of exploration, scientific discoveries, and economic development. Last Friday, SpaceX arrived at the International Space Station, delivering the world's first inflatable tent for astronauts.
I think this is a really good milestone for the future of spaceflight. I think it's another step towards the stars.
In recent years, China has also put a lot of effort into space exploration. 2016 will be a crucial and busy year for China's space program. The country is accelerating its space program and verifying key technologies. China's multi-billion-dollar space program aims to put a permanent manned space station into service around 2022. The Beijing Aerospace Command and Control Center says they are gearing up for this year's missions.
We have never carried out such intensive space missions like this year, which has posed new challenges for us. The Tiangong 2 Space Lab will be sent into a new orbit that is higher than any of those sent before. To ensure the success of the mission, we have to adjust all data of the fire control system.
However, the US and Russia have in recent years slashed budgets for space exploration. And with the International Space Station slated for closing, some say the era of space exploration faces an uncertain future.
For more on the International Day of Human Space Flight, we're joined by a very strong panel coming from all over the world. A big welcome to the four of you. First of all, Professor Yang Yuguang at the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, also Secretary of IAF, which stands for International Astronautical Federation Space Transportation Committee. Welcome to our program here in Beijing. Meanwhile, joining us from The Hague, we are having Giuseppe Riboldi, Director of Human Space Flight at the International Academy of Astronautics and also Executive Secretary of the Hague Space Resources Governance Working Group. Welcome as well, sir. Meanwhile, joining us in Moscow, Professor Yuri Razumny, who is the chair of the Spaceflight Mechanics and at the People's Friendship University of Russia, also member of the Russian Academy of Cosmonautics. In Washington, D.C., we are joined by Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, who is the chair of the Science Operations Working Group for the Mission Operations NASA Mars Exploration Rover mission. Welcome to the four of you. We are going to have a blast discussing this. What's going to happen? We understand part of the International Space Station likely to retire in 4 years. So what would that mean for humans' space travel? Let's go to Mr. Ribaldi first. What do you make of what's going to happen next?
Well, I think the space station will end up most likely, as you said, between 2024 and 2028. After the International Space Station comes to an end, we have the Chinese space station, which will be operational, which will ensure low Earth orbit permanence of human in space. And then we are looking forward to a new program. And this new program has to be a global program. It has to be open to all countries, and we are looking to create the vision of a moon village that we can discuss later.
The vision of a moon village, how far is it away from us, Professor Yang?
I believe it will probably be built in about 2030, and at that age. You see that China's space station program will cover a span between 2020 and 2030. It can be expected that it can prolong its lifespan, like that done by Mir and ISS.
All right, but what would be the roles of the United States and Russia, two countries originally founded the International Space Station in the outer space? Will they still be active member of this moon village, or they have other ways of figuring out their own roles in the near future? Let's go to Professor Razumny in Russia.
Hello.
Hello to you, sir.
Today is a remarkable day, and I would like to say a few words about what does it mean. The implementation of Soviet and later Russian space program began with the first manned space flight performed by Yuri Gagarin on April 1961, exactly on this day, Vostok spacecraft. Today the world is celebrating this event as international holiday. Numerous manned flights followed afterwards using Vostok, Voskhod, and since 1977 Soyuz spacecraft.
But you know, my question more is, Professor, my question more, if you could hear me clearly, is what's going to happen after the current ISS retires? Earlier we have Mr. Ribaldi talking about a moon village. Therefore, I asked you, what could be the role of Russia in that regard, or Russia has its own way of developing its space future?
Okay. I do not think that the spirit of competition and the desire to cooperate are gone in any country. And in my opinion, the decision on terminating or continuing the operation of IS depends on so much on the fall of this spirit and on the actual technical condition of the station and its models, the development of new technologies and so on. It was only our country that operated several orbital stations, several, I would like to stress it, before we arrived at the joint ISS station.
All right.
Everyone knows that repairing an old house may be far more expensive than pulling it down and building a new one instead. In each case, the economic evaluation should be performed with due regard to different aspects.
Okay,
I see you. Russia was.
I see you, Professor Razumny, have prepared very well the spoken remarks. We'll leave that just for the moment. Let me go to Dr. Ghosh inside the United States. Your Russian counterpart already talked about the economics of having the newer generation.
Yes.
And what about the role of the United States? You see your European counterparts and the Chinese counterparts talk about the moon village. Will that also be the way for the United States?
So, the United States had the Constellation program under President Bush. And so they had their plans of setting up their own moon colony. So it's too early to right now think about, so there is a lot of policy, a lot of discussions which perhaps will go into before such a decision is made. But NASA is also, if you are aware, planning to go to Mars with men. So human exploration of Mars, so that is going to be a priority. I don't know whether NASA at this stage wants to go back to the moon. These things change with presidents, change in presidential administrations. But right now, I think the focus is to try to send humans to Mars.
Okay, here comes the question.
And
here comes the question with your wonderful answer coming from various perspectives. Professor Ribaldi, obviously it seems that everybody has their own priorities. Resources are limited, and the debates about competition and cooperation has always been ongoing. So what does that mean for the vision that you have outlined, which is a moon village? Obviously, your Russian counterpart, your American counterparts have a very different version.
Okay, well, first of all, I would like to say that the moon village is not a project like the International Space Station. It is basically a vision for a common destination of multiple user and multiple uses. So that's the first point. The second point is that there is no, let's say, different point of view between going to Mars and setting up a moon village. The exploration is going towards the moon and Mars and beyond. So the issue is where we go first after the ISS, whether we go to Mars or we go to the moon to set up a moon village.
What do you think?
And at this point in time, the rationale and the economics, well, obviously the logic is that we will go back to the moon, but we are not going to back to the moon to just put a footstep, but just to create an economics. And the use of basically resources on the moon is key for the exploration to move forwards towards Mars. So the two, they are consistent. The cislunar part is part of the exploration towards Mars, so moon is a step towards Mars.
Okay, Dr. Ghosh, moon first, Mars second.
So there is.
Is it?
Right. So I would perhaps agree with him. It does not necessarily conflict with NASA's vision, but at the same time, I wanted to catch on to something that you mentioned, that how's the economics going to play out. So one of the things we're realizing from this, our experience in spaceflight from the 60s, is that, say, the human mission to Mars is going to be 100 times at least more expensive than a robotic mission to Mars. And the robotic mission is teaching us equally a lot of stuff. And two is human endurance of astronauts. If you were following the Mark Kelly story, he's just came back from the space station. Humans can just live in space for maybe 1 or 2 years. But say if you're going to Pluto, it will take 15 years. And it will take 15 years to go one way. And so humans may not be the right tool, either from a human endurance, physical endurance plus psychological endurance perspective, or from an economic complexity perspective. So while human exploration will be there, I think robotic exploration will supplement it. And that's how space exploration will go forward.
All right. Picture already getting very complicated right now, Mr. Yang. First of all, is it moon first or Mars first? Okay, there's an answer need to be given. Secondly, should that be a robotic or should that be human? Which should be the priority? And is that priority well spent when it comes to the money? Mr. Yang, from your perspective.
Of course, for any destination, we must have the robotic missions first. But you see, for any nation, including Russia, China, and the United States, the Mars will be the final destination, but for any nation which want to go to Mars, we must go to Moon first, technologically speaking. But it is reasonable for United States to cancel the Constellation program because they've already been to Moon before. But for China, Russia, and Europe, we should go to the Moon first. The Apollo program taught us a lesson that we should have long-term consideration for the sustainable exploration and the exploitation of the Moon. So that is the reason of the Moon Village.
All right.
concept.
Well, all right. Interesting debate. Another direction of this debate is what is going to happen between, let's just say, gentlemen, your organizations. Many of you are coming from state-supported organizations or an organization involving various kind of state-supported space agencies. So what would that mean? You've already seen during the weekend, SpaceX, which is a commercial company, trying to launch various kind of services into the outer space. You have also heard about the possible joint collaboration between Boeing and also Bigelow and many of the other commercial organizations for their exploration into the outer space. So what is going to be when you say a phrase, democratizing space, which is quite an interesting slogan, as they say. But what would that mean for the already existing system that we see today? And what would that mean for the priorities that you guys have been debating about? Dr. Ghosh, let's begin with you.
Right, so this is a very fascinating question that you ask. So SpaceX, while it is a commercial company, it's still underwritten mostly by NASA. So the commercial, you see the activity just starting. What will be fascinating is if there was legs of demand from the mass market, if a common person in China or in Washington, D.C. finds a reason to use the services of the space industry.
Right.
I don't think we are there yet, but there's a very exciting development which you saw over the weekend. SpaceX is starting to do reusable rockets. So imagine you took a flight from Washington to Beijing and you had to throw the aircraft away. That's what we do in here. What SpaceX is trying to do is reuse the vehicle so that the cost of space flight will go down by 100 times.
Okay.
So that completely changes the economics.
Okay,
right?
but let me go to...
So I think...
Final words from you.
I think the development of the mass market is critical.
Let's go to our Russian guest, Professor Ravzuni. You've been listening very carefully. What about Russia? You see your European counterparts, your American counterparts, they have already, when it comes to commercial companies, working on these commercial possibilities. Russia, with a history of former Soviet Union, has a very good foundation when it comes to space development. Is Russia also going to direct your attention toward that direction?
Yes, of course. We are following this way, and we try to create special commercial companies which work in this area and provide different services in this area. But maybe traditionally we think more about governmental projects because we have maybe some problems with the economists now, but it is not a big problem for now because we are full of enthusiasm and we have a lot of nice specialists in this area, and they try to cooperate together with European, American specialists, and moreover we have very perspective projects not only in near Earth space, but we speak also about Moon Village. Moon Village project is not European village, but also Russian village.
That's right. All right.
Our Russian families also would like to have flats on the moon together with European and American partners.
Well, it is a village.
We in the team.
Yeah, okay, Russia in the team. Let's go to Mr. Rivaldi. You were smiling while your Russian counterpart was saying that Russia is also a member of the village. Yes, indeed, that's a vision. But what about now, Professor Rivaldi? Will those commercial companies, in a way, take the precedence of exploring some of the other possibilities that your organization or your members have never done. For example, I understand Bigelow is talking about B330, which is 330 centimeter so-called inflammable area in the outer space being sent in the near future. So when you talk about Moon Village and many other visions, where is going to be the role of theirs? Are they going to be very competitive, or still the major roles are with state-supported organizations?
So thank you for the question. I think, as I said before, the Moon Village is a vision where there is room for government and for industry. So industry has demonstrated the maturity in developing hardware like SpaceX. It's made remarkable. Bigelow and others, they will do it. But obviously the moon is a new destination. There are a number of commercial companies set up in the United States, and there is a Google Moon Express competition to land in 2017. So there is a lot of interest of commercial company in the moon utilization, and this is the key. So as far as the government is concerned, the government has the role of developing infrastructure. So like for the highway, the government will develop the highway, and then all the infrastructure and all the utilization will be left to the private. So the Moon Village is the ideal destination where there is a synergy between government investment and industry investment.
What about China? Will that be the infrastructure builder, or will that be the cars running on the highway? Mr. Yang, final words from you. We're running out of time.
Of course, for any nation, including China, who want to go to Moon or go to Mars, the cost is the most biggest problem. So in the future, commercialized space field is a very efficient way for us to reduce cost and make it more possible to go to Moon or go to Mars.
All right, fascinating conversation. Gentlemen, we are going to continue our conversation.
I have a quick point.
Well, one sentence if you can. We're really running out of time.
Right. So I don't think we have the commercial justification for commercial companies to get involved in the moon base. There is just no demand. This has to be a government effort, I feel.
Well, different opinions. Thank you so much, Dr. Taba Ghosh, coming from Washington, D.C., Professor Yang Yu Guang here with us in Beijing, Giuseppe Riboldi coming from The Hague, and Professor Yuri Razumny coming from Moscow. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. It's a fascinating conversation. We're looking forward. Thank you. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.